Today we're talking about Critter Crops, a farming sim with just a little bit of a twist to it. Let's talk about that. Tell me about what got you into game development and what the name Skyreach Studios, where that came from.
So I started with game development kind of just as a hobby a long time ago. I never intended for it to be in any serious capacity. And then I ended up doing this game, Critter Crops, for a senior project. And it's kind of just evolved from a senior project to an actual project. And so the name Skyreach, so many people ask, and it's a pretty personal name. I come from a pretty impoverished family, and the age-old concept of reaching for the stars was kind of really what kept me motivated through my life, and that's kind of a play on that concept.
How long, you said you've been working on it as a senior project, so how long have you been working on this game?
I think it's been 5 or 6 months. I had 8 weeks in my actual schooling to do what I had to do for school, and actually the original concept, the scope of the game was literally just have a character run around, plant some seeds, harvest the seeds. That's it. That was the whole concept. And now it is what it is.
It definitely took off from there. So what engine are you using for this game? Is it Unreal? Is it Unity? What did you decide on with this?
I'm actually using Unity.
What kind of drove you to that one specifically?
Funny story, I actually have a lot of experience in Unreal Engine. I kind of dabbled in game development before this game, and most of it was in Unreal. But I think most people know that Unreal Engine isn't really the greatest choice when you're trying to do something 2D, because it's just not as friendly to 2D games. So I was like, all right, I guess it's time to gravitate toward Unity and see what I can do in there.
That makes a lot of sense. So Critter Crops, it's an artistically driven game just because it's got that hand-drawn art style to it. Kind of what drove you to that specifically with this game?
Honestly, because I didn't have anybody to make 3D stuff for me or anything, and I really wanted unique designs. I didn't want to buy assets. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll have to draw them myself, and so it just kind of ended up being what it is.
Gotcha. Did you have an art background at all, or is that not something that kind of came into play?
I've been drawing since forever. My mom and my grandparents say all the time that when I was a kid, they had to check on me constantly because I was so quiet, and I was always somewhere drawing a picture.
Gotcha.
So I don't really have a professional background in art, but I've been doing it since forever. So
outside of just the art style, it's a farming sims. What kind of pushed you in that direction?
I am a cliche, and I love Stardew Valley. But there were some things about Stardew Valley that I felt like they were missing in the game. And of course, I'm totally not bashing the dev because they did an incredible job with that game. But I was like, it would be really cool if I could make Stardew Valley, but add in these small, minute details that I wish were in the game. It's a lot of Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing, actually Pokemon. Okay. Because I love Pokemon Yellow back in the day when Pikachu used to follow you around, and now in Critter Crops your creatures follow you around in the map, so I was like, yeah.
Yeah, it fits together really well. So with that, what about kind of the story behind the game itself? Can you kind of talk about what that is exactly?
So, I will say the whole story
Mm,
of Critter Cops is going to be a lot more emotional than people are going to be guessing going in. But it's basically the main character, Sylvie. She's a witch, and she just discovered this, and she gets run out of her town by people who think witches are bad.
mm-hmm.
And she gets a letter that invites her to Murmur Town, and she has no idea who this letter is from, and that's basically what you're trying to figure out the whole game is who invited me here, why, and how. Like, how
Okay.
did they do this?
So I played the demo. Is it more of kind of a technical test in a sense because it is a little bit more focused in on just kind of the farming aspect and it's kind of more closed in that way? So how much kind of does that translate over to the actual story itself?
So the pre-alpha
Mm,
is actual game content.
okay.
So everything that you see there is going to be in the actual game. It was meant to be kind of like a tutorial, very focused on the individual pieces of what you can do in the game. And that is going to extend a little bit to the actual alpha and beta, because there are other elements of the game that weren't introduced in that pre-alpha demo.
Hmm.
Like there's a combat aspect in the game, um, and crafting, and those are the kinds of things that you can expect to see like in the actual alpha. And then beyond that is where you kind of get into like the actual details of the story and getting to know the other characters and kind of some of the lore and secrecy
Okay.
that is kind of going on.
Yeah, so the actual game world itself, I know you're still developing the game, obviously, so maybe it's not set in stone, but kind of how big are you expecting that actual world of exploration to be?
Quite large. So spoiler alert. Sort of. So there are going to be essentially different biomes in
Mm,
the game. There's I won't tell you the names, but Murmur Town is kind of like the central location. There's going to be a swamp area, kind of like a snowy place, and a couple others that are pretty big. So there will be lots to see and some secret areas as well. So.
So that actually brings into the next question really well because it was going to be about the farming aspect of the game itself. So how does that kind of change with each different biome?
There are different critters in every biome,
Makes
and
sense.
kind of different requirements for
Mm,
planting in different areas. And obviously, if you have a snow critter, you cannot bring your snow critter to, say, the swamp area. They will die. So there will be some stuff that you have to do in order to keep your critter safe while you're away.
gotcha. And so kind of with that in mind, talk to me about just the farming aspect of the game in general, just kind of how it evolves as the game goes on, just kind of the basic core mechanics behind it, what kind of players can expect when they get in there.
So right now, for those that have played the demo, it's kind of just you plant the seed, it grows,
Mm,
you harvest it. If you don't harvest it, it dies.
yeah.
Um, so there will be a kind of hydrating, like you have to water the plants. There will be some creatures that require you to plant something with them in order for
Mm,
them to grow. I'll give you one just because he's out there in the world already. It is Weirder Melon, the
okay.
werewolf watermelon. He requires wolfsbane to be put with him in order to grow. Um, and that's something that you craft. And so in other areas, like the snow area, when you dig a hole, it also digs the snow.
Mm,
And for the things to grow, you have to put snow back on it. So different things like that in different areas. And obviously, like time to harvest takes longer for
hmm.
different ones. And things like that.
Gotcha. Okay. And then so with the crafting aspect in game, before we kind of talk about any of the combat or anything like that, how much does crafting come into play with this game, and kind of how does it, obviously you said it affects, you know, the farming aspect. Is it something like, can you craft like magical items for Sylvie, or does that not come into play? It's more focused on the farming.
Actually, I have integrated crafting into a lot of aspects of the game. For example, eventually you get a Grimoire, a spell book, essentially.
Yeah.
And your spell book starts off with 3 spells. And you can actually get more spells later on for a maximum of 6. But in order to get more spells, you have to commune with the Oracle, and the Oracle requires specific items to be sacrificed to her, and those are items that you would craft.
Okay. And so I have to ask, where did the idea for the Grimoire come from?
I actually don't know. I'm super into witchy stuff. I mean, I'm very on brand today.
Yeah.
But so I was like, okay, I really want to have spells, and I don't know how to integrate them. And I didn't want to do it like a traditional, just, okay, you have spells because you're a witch. So, it's kind of not fun. So I was like, spell book, you know, Book of the Dead kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Only reason I ask is because the first thing I thought of was Black Clover. It's an anime.
I know Black Clover.
Yep. Grimoire. It was just instantly came to mind. I was like, oh, maybe that's why. So with that, obviously, you know, the magic and the different spells. Kind of talk to me about the combat in game. It's a farming sims, obviously, so the whole aspect that combat's even in part of it is fascinating to me. So can you kind of break down exactly how that comes into play in the game?
So, you played the demo, so I'm sure you saw the big spiky roots that are kind of blocking your way everywhere. And there's a little bit of a hint that is given that those spiky roots are coming from the mansion. And so the mansion is pretty much like the central point to the whole game. And it is doing things to the island that aren't really great. And one of those things, it is essentially creating these little monsters that are called weeders.
Okay.
AKA weed eaters. And those guys actually will eat your critters. And so essentially you're going around whacking the weeds. That's but your spells, there's a lot of different types. There are like right now I have functioning, like Sylvie gets this like sun bubble, and anything that comes in the bubble will get hurt. It's kind of per grimoire because there's 3.
Okay.
You kind of have to play differently with each one. There's Book of the Exalted, the Sanguine Text, and Tome of the Wild. Blood magic, light magic, and nature magic.
Gotcha.
And that also determines what spells you can get later on in the game.
So with those books in mind, can you use all 3 at one time? Can you only equip one? So how does that work?
Pick one.
You only can pick one.
Yep, you get to pick one in the beginning, and the person that sells it to you, he definitely makes it known. You're a witch. When you bond with your book, that's it. Don't mess it up. Don't pick the wrong one. So yeah, you get to pick your one, and then that's it.
So it really kind of that adds to the replayability.
RPG aspect. That's essentially like your class.
Gotcha. You mentioned the whole shop aspect, buying items, inventory, stuff like that. Can you kind of touch on, I guess, the different things you can buy, the different characters you run into, NPCs that'll help kind of sell you different things, that kind of thing?
Sure. So there is the seed vendor.
Mhm.
He's called the Cropper. He's pretty straightforward. He sells the seeds.
Mhm.
There's Banshee. She is essentially like a Grim Reaper, but you sell your critters to her.
Mhm.
Don't ask me what she does with them.
When I played the demo, I did wonder that. I have to admit, I was like, I wonder exactly if this is gonna come up later in the game as something.
So many people are like, where are they going?
Mhm.
I'm like, shh. And then there is going to be, his name is escaping me. How do I forget my own characters' names? Oh, Crux.
Okay.
Crux is actually, he's the Grimoire merchant. So he's where you get your Grimoire and your future spells.
Mhm.
There is going to be kind of a person that crafts, that helps you with your crafting.
Mhm.
I don't have a name for them yet, so I can't tell you. And then there's also the goblins, and they help you build buildings.
Okay. And how does building buildings come into play in the game exactly?
It's more like fixing them, because everything already kind of exists.
Mhm.
In the world. It's all just kind of broken down, so they fix stuff
Okay,
for
so
you.
gotcha. And is there like an NPC aspect where like different NPCs, just like I guess townspeople, come into play within the game?
Yes,
Mhm.
so the reason you would want to fix up buildings is actually because you can have other residents in your town, and actually you will have to have them at a point in order to progress further.
Okay.
In each town or biome,
Mhm.
you'll be able to have 3 additional residents, and each place will have 6 residents to choose from, and they will kind of just randomly come into the town and just kind of look around, and you have to craft stuff for them and give them gifts in order to encourage them to actually move in.
That's the Animal Crossing aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. So, with that in mind, that really covers a lot of the different gameplay aspects, except for the critter crops themselves. Kind of how do they evolve as the game goes on? And I know there's a ton of them, so obviously, I'm not going to ask you to touch on all of them, but can you kind of briefly kind of go over a few of them and just kind of explain how they kind of, I guess, evolve as the game goes on?
So the critters have a purpose.
Hmm.
They're not actually they're not meant just to make a buck, because
Hmm.
people are like, oh, I'm just making them to sell them. Um, they actually all have special abilities.
Okay.
Um, for example, crowd favorite Pump Kitty
Mm.
will actually be able to light up dark places.
Okay.
So you can go into caves and other areas that you otherwise wouldn't be able to if you have enough pump kitties with you.
Hmm.
Um, and another is the weirder melon that I mentioned before. Actually acts as kind of a guard dog for your other critters to protect them from the weeders when you're not there. The bat berries can carry you over places that you wouldn't be able to like get over.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the only jump that exists in the game. You get to sort of fly with your bats. So each critter will have a point where you have to use their abilities to accomplish a goal.
So with the story itself, before we kind of wrap things up, is the story fixed, or is there kind of a branching aspect to it where if you make one decision or if you go to one biome, whatever it may be, the story kind of changes a little bit? Or is it all just kind of one direction specifically and you can't change that regardless of your choices?
It's pretty linear. I I'm not that skilled yet. But there will be things in the game
Mm-hmm.
that not everybody will experience. So there are some things that in order to access this place or this person or this information, you will have had to do some other thing, but it's not something that's like required. So you might not even know that it even existed.
So I know you're still pretty early on probably in development, but do you kind of have an idea of how long you want the actual story to be at the end, like an actual playthrough, just kind of an estimate? I know it's a hard question to ask, obviously it kind of varies, but
I would say that my goal, like if you were like really into it, like rigorous player, I always play RPGs and these kinds of games, I would say that my goal is somewhere around like 3 to 4 hours.
Okay, that's not bad at all. That's actually a pretty decent story. And so that's kind of all the questions I have about this game specifically. One thing that comes to mind though is kind of one of your first like main projects. So what kind of is something that came up as like it was much more intense than you thought it would be, or there was much more that went into it, or like an issue in development? What kind of comes to mind when you think about that?
So my first title that I attempted was called Portal Tamers.
Okay.
And I actually started that out as like a physical card game that kind of, I was like, I'm gonna try to make this into an actual game. I learned pretty quickly what I didn't know. The size of the game itself was really the biggest issue, and just the fact that like I was trying to make a 3D game and I'm not a 3D modeler, and I was trying to learn 3D modeling while learning coding, and it was just not moving forward. It was just not working out. Like the thing I struggled with most was just kind of accepting what I couldn't do.
So you are a solo developer with this project. Do you have any plans to kind of bring other people on to help you with different aspects down the road, or is that not something that comes to mind right now?
So honestly, if I could have other people on this project with me, I would already. Shameless plug. I'm gonna be having a Kickstarter purely because I do want to bring other people on, and I know there's a lot of other really passionate developers that are kind of in the same situation that I'm in, and or that I was in before, looking for somebody to work with, looking for something to work on.
And then, so you mentioned the Kickstarter. Do you have like a set date for it at this point, or is it kind of not planned yet when it's going to go up?
I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, that I can, kind of get enough support by around like March or April of next year. And if that's successful, I'm really shooting to launch the game on Halloween of next year. If not, the game's still going to be finished. A lot of people were like, oh no, what if the Kickstarter doesn't work out? I'm still going to complete the game. It's just going to take probably a lot longer. So that would kind of leave my actual release date a little bit up in the air.
That makes sense. When you release it, and obviously I know it's a year out at this point, if even that, do you kind of have a plan of where you want to release the game at? Like just PC, or just plugging it into Nintendo? Switch is huge into getting indie devs up, or Xbox has been getting pretty into it lately as well. Do you kind of have ideas with that?
I'm definitely going to be on Steam. And right now, the only console I really have on my radar is the Switch.
Okay.
I think it's more than, I feel like the style and type of game that Critter Crops is just fits a lot better into kind of the Switch library.
Yeah.
Not so much. I honestly wouldn't. I don't even know if I would ever do PlayStation. That's the one that I'm like, I don't know, just because that's those big AAA games, and I could never compete. So
well, PlayStation does bring on more recently. They've been bringing on a lot of indie developers, so I guess you never know. But for what it is, I think you're right. Nintendo Switch really does kind of focus in on a lot of, I guess you would say, farming style games, so it would fit really well. And with porting, have you ever thought about like I guess this is, you don't have to answer this one if you don't know, but is there a publisher you would look at, a specific one you kind of lean in towards, or is that, not on the radar yet?
I don't want to scare anybody, but I will be honest. I am trying to get a publisher.
Okay.
There's quite a few that are on my radar. I won't say who, but I have some very specific requirements. But I'm super lenient. You can see my dog in the background. I'm super lenient. There are just some things that I'm like, I like, as a starting dev, I kind of know where I stand. I'm kind of the new guy, and they have a lot of leverage, and that's, a lot of people have voiced their concerns. They're like, oh, a publisher's gonna change the game. They're gonna force you to do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say I don't want any of my supporters to be afraid of that, because I am not gonna let that happen.
I would have to ask, just because the topic did come up with indie developers. There is a lot of, there's a lot of great things in indie development, and there are some negatives in the sense of, publishers taking over projects, just like different little things. I mean, Steam had the whole fiasco where they pushed out, I think it was like a 24-hour return for indie games, and they only take like 4 hours to beat, so obviously that impacted developers. There's a lot of little things that come into play that affect indie devs negatively. So what's kind of something you could key in on, if anything, that really pops out as like a negative for the indie development world?
I think that as an indie developer, adding that word indie before your title has kind of seemed to create this idea of lack of quality. And a lot of consumers, they don't want to pay for what they're playing. And I think that really the perception of what being an indie developer is one of the hardest parts of being an indie dev, because I tell people, oh, I do this, and they treat it like it's a silly hobby or some dumb thing that I'm wasting my time with, and so I think a lot of indie devs will start to have a lack of self-worth, and I feel like that's why a lot of them get taken advantage of by crappy publishers, because they don't realize what gold they actually have, whereas the publishers know. They've been doing it for a long time. Not to say every publisher is a horrible thing, because I'm trying to get one, but I just think that we as indie developers really need to spend more time in understanding like our own self-worth and what we actually possess.
No, I completely agree with that. So I guess outside of that, is there anything really that you want to touch on within the game itself? Gameplay mechanic, you mentioned the Kickstarter, something else you're launching in the future. Is there anything you want to key in on before we leave or begin the interview?
Just that I really would love if people would join our Discord and help me out, and tell me what they think of the game. I'm a very, very humble person, and always looking to hear people's input, and just trying to make the game better. So come be my friend.
And there you have it. That is the interview. That is Critter Crops. I had a really good time playing this demo. You know what? It's a really great game. Very colorful, very fun. The itch.io is down below if you want to check it out for yourself. I definitely recommend that you do. Her Twitter page is down below, so make sure you check that out as well. And the website. Everything's down there. Go check it out. Go give her some support. But until next time, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you on the flip side. Take it easy.